I'd like to invite our first panel to the stage to address national cybersecurity strategies, collaboration, and information sharing across borders. Some of them have traveled quite a distance to be with us today, and I know we all appreciate it. The Honorable Phyllis Sneck will be the moderator. Phyllis, thank you. Thank you for rushing through traffic this morning. Happy to turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for having us here. Thank you to Catherine for many years of international cybersecurity collaboration and thought that I've been in this room. So this morning, I want to talk a little bit about why this is so important. As you know, cybersecurity, we're all connected. We've heard that before. But this transcends competitive and corporate boundaries. It transcends international boundaries. Every country has their own way of looking at this, and we have to work it together. Our adversaries are working it together very well, and this means that we have to work harder. We have to protect that which is important to our way of life in each country and together and as a globe. So we're very fortunate to have 4 people here that have expertise in this area, explore a lot of how the interagency collaboration works, how the regional collaboration works, how it's working with public and private in each case, and something near and dear to me from DHS, what's so important about information sharing? We talk about this a lot. It's almost commonplace. Why are we doing it? What's the end of it? I represent the National Protection and Programs Directorate from the Department of Homeland Security. So as you know, in DHS, we have many, many different parts. In our part, we have the Cybersecurity and Communications. That's under me. We also have the Office of Infrastructure Protection. And all of that, as well as our Federal Protective Service and our Office of Intelligence Analysis, as well as biometrics, comes up to Undersecretary Spalding. And by telling you that, I mean we look at cybersecurity within my part of DHS as how we mitigate and respond, so network defense, for everything that protects and enables our way of life. But we also have parts of DHS that are law enforcement. So we work very closely with our partners, FBI, Secret Service, and Homeland Security Investigations, and then our brothers and sisters in the FBI and the intelligence community that Phil represents today. And in our National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, acronym world known as the NCIC, that's our 24/7 watch center. It's where a lot of the excitement happens, where we understand and learn and receive information from victims or for those that share information, whether it be private sector partners, state and local, to help us with our role to respond and mitigate to cyber threats, to civilian government, private sector, all the way from the smallest companies to the largest, and academia. We are the center of sharing what I call cyber threat indicators, the raw materials of cybersecurity information, working hand in hand with our privacy and civil liberty experts to ensure that we collect enough information to get a situational awareness that helps to protect us, to be able to share that information in near real time, machine to machine, internationally. We could talk about that today. At the same time, doing it right so we protect all the things that define our ways of life internationally with privacy and civil liberties. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and it's an honor to introduce Bob Gordon, who I've had the opportunity in both private sector and now in public service with whom to work.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in today's conference as we explore enhancing cooperation across digital borders. What I'd like to do is just spend a minute at the outset to just describe a little bit of the mandate of public safety because it'll give you a little bit of context for our remarks that'll follow along. We have a lot of the similarities of the cybersecurity responsibilities that Phyllis just described in the Department of Homeland Security. We also have the coordination functions that are the responsibility of the President's Cybersecurity Coordinator. Broadly speaking, we're the lead portfolio within the federal government dealing with all matters related to public safety, including things such as national security, emergency management, countering crime, and border strategies. Within the realm of cybersecurity, our responsibilities are basically fourfold. We house the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center. That's Canada's national CERT, and they're the single point of entry into the Government of Canada for all critical infrastructure organizations on cybersecurity issues. We provide the policy and coordination functions across government for basically all federal government departments. We provide the cyber policy and programs for critical infrastructure. And we also deliver the Cybersecurity Public Awareness Program. Let me begin my remarks by briefly outlining Canada's cybersecurity strategy, which we released in 2010. Our strategy is a public-facing document. It spoke of the rising threat and the need to marshal and leverage government and private sector capabilities to address it. The strategy is built around 3 pillars. First, the need to protect the Government of Canada networks and to safeguard the information they contain. That's also fundamental to our national and economic security. It's also necessary for maintaining the trust and confidence of our citizens and our allies who entrust us with their information. Second, the strategy tasks government with working with partners to protect critical systems outside of the federal jurisdiction. Principally, our work focuses on protecting critical information infrastructure. In the federal framework, these systems are frequently owned by the private sector, but regulated at the provincial and not the federal level. Third, the strategy seeks to raise awareness to enable Canadians to better protect themselves against cyber threats. The strategy recognizes that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility between government, the private sector, and individuals. International engagement is a key priority for Canada because dealing with cyber threats in isolation just isn't acceptable. It won't work. Canada is committing to working with the United States and other like-minded countries to ensure that we have a common approach, that we're able to prevent, monitor, and respond to the threat of cyber attacks, not only within our individual countries, but also within our region. I'm going to offer a few specific initiatives both in the Canada-US context and also in the broader international domain. Public safety and the Department of Homeland Security have had a long history of collaboration in order to protect our respective critical infrastructure. These efforts apply equally into the cyber dimension. For example, at the tactical level, in October 2012, Canada and the United States announced the Cyber Action Plan between the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Homeland Security to enhance the already strong partnership and cooperation on cybersecurity matters between both countries. It sets out a number of very practical objectives for cooperation. An example of a concrete result of the initiative is that Canada and the United States have enhanced operational collaboration on handling cyber incidents. Canada has been a participant in the US-led exercises such as Cyberstorm, National Exercise in 2012, and the GridX-1 and GridX-2. Another example was last March. Officials from the Canada's Incident Response Centre spent a week at the NCIC, borrowing Phyllis's acronym, to work alongside their US counterparts and to get a deeper understanding both at the personal level and also at the operational level. Canada and the United States have also provided joint cybersecurity briefings to cross-border critical infrastructure sectors such as financial, rail, and energy sectors, and we've conducted joint workshops on industrial control systems to the private sector. One of the really exciting initiatives is the work that's underway both with DHS and public safety, the work we've been doing with the private sector to enable the exchange of near real-time, actionable threat information between the government and the private sector. Both countries have agreed to use the same software protocols that will eventually enable the sharing of information at the national level between private sector and government and internationally between both countries. In Canada, we have a pilot project that's underway with about 20 private sector companies and other levels of government. Second, we also believe that it's important that wherever possible, our private sector companies receive advice from the government that's consistent with and takes advantage of advice provided by other like-minded countries. In that regard, Public Safety Canada has developed a document for critical infrastructure owners and operators that offers information on preventing intrusion and disruptions to their network. That document endorses the framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity that was developed by NIST in partnership with DHS. Canada acknowledges the framework's relevance and applicability within the Canadian context. As a matter of fact, Canada participated in the drafting of the NIST framework. The document encourages critical infrastructure operators to apply the principles outlined in the NIST framework to analyze existing practices, establish action-oriented objectives, and implement measures to enhance their cybersecurity posture. The document further recognizes that there are a number of other cybersecurity standards and best practices available in Canada and offers some additional information. Third, both Canada and the United States are moving ahead with information sharing arrangements to deal with the increased cyber risks that confront the private sector. Many Canadian companies benefit from being members of Information Sharing Analysis Centers, or ISACs, that exist in the United States. But both countries recognize that information sharing needs to also occur across these sectors. To that end, in Canada, work is underway with the private sector to better understand the challenges and opportunities in improving cyber threat information sharing across Canadian industry sectors. The private sector is recommending the establishment of an across-sector Canada Information Security Sharing Hub. A fourth example of collaboration is coordinating our cybersecurity public awareness efforts. Both countries recognize October as Cyber Awareness Month. To give effect to our awareness efforts, a partnership has been established between Canada's Get Cyber Safe, it's a public awareness campaign, and the Stop, Think, Connect initiative in the United States, which is organized by the coalition of private companies, not-for-profit organizations, and the government. Let me conclude by offering a few comments on the broader international aspects of information sharing and collaboration. Active collaboration with international organizations is crucial, and this is one of the reasons why Canada and the United States maintain strong engagement activities in the hemisphere. Proof of this is our support for the Organization of American States Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, or CICITE. International organizations, particularly groups like CICITE, have been key actors to advance capacity building efforts by enabling participating states to combat crime and terrorism both online and offline. Canada has helped to fund OAS and CICITE initiatives aimed to enhance regional level planning and coordination, as well as regional cooperation efforts. As I previously mentioned, Canada also recognizes that cybersecurity requires a global effort, and I can proudly say that Canada's National Computer Incident Response Team, or CSIRC, has formal and ongoing collaboration with 18 computer incident response teams that have been recently established throughout the Americas. It's through such response teams that we can share information on cyber threats and best practices so that we can better address our common concerns regarding cybersecurity. A final example of international collaboration was the announcement at the Global Conference on Cyberspace in The Hague by Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs that Canada is joining the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise as a founding member. The minister also announced that Canada will be providing over $3 million to support anti-cybercrime capacity building initiatives in Central America and the Caribbean. And I think I'll stop at that point.
Thank you. We have a lot to talk about this morning. So, Komi Suzaki.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to such a wonderful conference in a historic hall with great audience and panelists. I'd like to explain Japanese Ministry of Defense perception of cyberspace security. And secondly, I'd like to talk about the recent initiatives by the Japanese government and MOD. And thirdly, I'd like to talk about the future direction of Japan's cyber policy. Let me begin with an overview of threat perception. The ICT, information communication technology, has become a foundation of all social, economic, and cultural activities with the utilization and development of widespread, sophisticated information and IC technologies, such as smartphones and Internet of Things. Cyberspace, which has been brought about by the development of ICT, is now an important platform to support the growth of the state. On the other hand, with the further reliance on ICT, the complex, sophisticated methods of cyber attack and expansion of the scope of the attack, the severity of cyber threats are increasing, a situation in which the real-world administrative and social function is paralyzed due to the destruction of infrastructure is more likely to happen these days. Even the self-defense forces, or SDFs, are dependent on domestic and foreign social infrastructures, such as electrical, power grid, and communication lines, to execute their various missions. They include peacekeeping operations, disaster relief operations, and defense operations. A cyber attack against SDF's network and infrastructure is serious. Cyber attack against social infrastructures can be a major obstructive factor to SDF mission too. This means protection of critical infrastructure from cyber attack is an extremely important matter to be considered for mission assurance of the SDFs. Oh, by the way, SDF is the abbreviation for the Japanese military establishment. Therefore, ensuring a stable use of cyberspace from the security point of view is one of the most important challenges that must be addressed by the whole of government and the international community, rather than tackled solely by the military. Second point is recent initiatives. The Basic Act on Cybersecurity passed the extraordinary diet session last fall. It went into effect this January. From the viewpoint of security, the following 3 points are important. The first, the Information Security Policy Council, which was chaired by the Chief Cabinet Secretary and consisted of cabinet ministers, including a defense minister, evolved into a new organization called the Cybersecurity Strategic Headquarters. Second, by the new law, other ministries and agencies are obliged to submit materials and information on cyber incidents to the Cybersecurity Strategic Headquarters. Its secretariat, NISC, has a mandate to collect information from other ministries and agencies. This rule can enhance information sharing and incident response capability in the whole of government framework. Third, since this law stipulates the relation between Cybersecurity Strategic Headquarters and the National Security Council, national security aspects of cybersecurity policy will be emphasized in Japan. Recently, Ministry of Defense, or MOD, is focusing on implementing the following initiatives. The Cyber Defense Group was launched at the end of March 2014 with the aim of providing 24-hour monitoring of the MOD's network and gathering information. Currently, expansion of personnel and its function are discussed. For example, Ministry of Defense may consider ability to prevent adversaries' use of cyberspace in the midterm defense program that was formulated in the end of 2013. This is a 5-year defense program. In terms of enhancing training workforce development, we have secured budget from fiscal year 2014-15 for developing the cyber range, and we are now making arrangements for that. From the viewpoint of partnership with private entities, we established a Cyber Defense Council 2 years ago to enhance dialogues with defense industries. We are promoting various cooperative efforts, including development of incident information sharing and joint training and exercise with private sectors. We think it important to have dialogues between defense authorities too. For example, we established a Japan-US Cyber Defense Policy Working Group, or CDPWG, 2 years ago. This group was co-chaired by Ministry of Defense Deputy Director General of Defense Policy Bureau and Department of Defense Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber Policy. We also have dialogues with other partner countries or organizations such as United Kingdom and NATO. We are strengthening our specialized and concrete cyber defense cooperation, including exchange of best practices in training and human resource development. And we share threat information through these dialogues. In addition, we are having dialogues with other countries such as confidence building measures. In addition, subject to the provisions of the above-mentioned Basic Act on Cybersecurity, just passed last November, we are currently developing a new national cybersecurity strategy with the leadership of NISC, National Center of Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity. This is supposed to be adopted by the Cabinet and will become public in coming June. The new strategy will specify 3 objectives of the Basic Act on Cybersecurity. First, improving vitality of economy and society. Second, realization of the society in which people can live with safety and security. And third, peace and stability of international society and Japan's national security. Next is the future direction. Traditionally, the SDFs are considered self-sufficient organization in accomplishing their missions as well as have the highest capability among government organizations. They have a leading responsibility for Japan's security. On the other hand, they can no longer achieve their mission alone, since land, sea, and air and space domains are all linked through cyberspace. The SDFs are not the only organization that possess advanced capabilities in cyberspace. We have multiple actors such as police, regulatory agencies, private companies, including entities of critical infrastructure and individuals. Therefore, in order to accomplish SDF mission assurance, it is important to make efforts in ensuring the functions of the entire country, along with capacity building of all these actors. In addition, considering the fact that cyberspace is globally linked and maximizing opportunities for future US-Japan joint operations pursuant to the new Defense Cooperation Guidelines for or dispatching self-defense forces to peacekeeping missions based on the ongoing national security legislation, we need to cooperate further with like-minded countries, including the United States. Specifically, we have priority in bilateral multilateral threat information sharing in a prompt and appropriate manner. Discussion of offer incentives to the private sector for accelerating cybersecurity and capacity building through joint training and exercise are recommended. Ministry of Defense will bear in mind the new cybersecurity strategy, the Japan-US Defense Cooperation Guidelines, and the new national security legislation, and we will accelerate various reviews related to cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm focusing on your statement that can go to the whole panel today. We can't do this mission alone. So we'll keep that as a theme. Next is Phil Quaid, Special Assistant to the Director for the National Security Agency for Cyber and Chief of the NSA Cyber Task Force, and who has been an incredible partner to many others, including us within the government on the research and technology side.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thanks for having the National Security Agency here to participate in the panel. Last week I was out in San Francisco getting ready for a panel on cybersecurity at the RSA conference. Maybe some others were there as well. And prior to the panel, I was chatting with a relatively junior technologist from a company, and she was from the standards arena, and she was incredibly smart. So I have her business card and intend to follow up. But what struck me was something that she asked me, almost in a pleading way, as we finished our conversation about standards. She said, "Do you think the day will ever arise when the intelligence part of NSA splits off from the cybersecurity, the defensive part of NSA?" And what she was trying to say that, in her own way, was that NSA brings forth tremendous technical insight and operational experience in cyberspace, but it has a subtle people suspected of doing bad things against the American public. Of course, it doesn't do that. But we have a valuable technical contribution to make to those who make policies and operate networks. So specifically, the National Security Agency fundamentally is about helping to keep the country safe, helping ensure its national security. And the way it does that is it collects intelligence on foreign adversaries, and that's one half of its mission. The other half of its mission is to do cybersecurity for the Department of Defense and other national security systems. And everything that NSA does, of course, is authorized by the President, the Congress, and the courts. But NSA made the press a couple years ago because it was disclosed the scale at which it conducts its authorized intelligence activities. And my impression of the reaction of the public was not so much that people believed that NSA broke the law in conducting its foreign intelligence mission, but they were kind of weirded out that NSA didn't have to break the law to do the things in foreign cyberspace at the speed and scale it did. And I think it surprised a lot of people. And so we're very happy with the public dialogue about, what's it take to do things at speed and scale in cyberspace. And what people observed was that the NSA strategies to do its foreign intelligence mission against adversaries and terrorists and such is that we use very, very high degrees of automation and integration of products to achieve the speed and scale results. And the reason I give you that rather long introduction about the intelligence part of NSA is because the strategies of automation and integration are very much applicable to the cybersecurity problem as well. Specifically, information sharing is the blood that needs to flow to make this overall strategy work. Information sharing between public and private sectors, private to private sectors, foreign partners, U.S. government partners. It's all about getting that blood to flow across the cybersecurity fabric so that we can each protect our own national interests and help protect each other's global interests of our common values such as economic prosperity, freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. That information sharing and type of collaboration has served us very, very well internationally when addressing the counterterrorism problem. And again, we think that the information sharing and automation and integration are strategies that will also serve us well for cybersecurity. Fundamentally, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to address the destabilizing actions of those who are trying to have negative effects for us in cyberspace and do so in a way without using force, right? So there's lots of different ways to do that. So when I talk about information sharing, I'd like to get a little bit more specific, if I could, please. Sometimes we talk about information sharing as only being sharing our insights on threat. Now, don't get me wrong, that's an incredibly important aspect of information sharing. As Phyllis said earlier, Department of Homeland Security gets specialized insights on threats, and they are very much focused on sharing with those who can put those insights into action. Similarly, the National Security Agency gets insight onto foreign threats, and we provide that information to those who can make it actionable, including Department of Homeland Security. But I don't want to focus on just sharing threat information. So we really ought to talk a little bit more about describing things in terms of risk, of course. Risk is defined as threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. So one of the key themes key messages I'd like to leave is that we make sure we're talking about sharing insights on threats, insights on vulnerabilities, and insights on consequences. Because ultimately, in cybersecurity, you might, if you understand the preciseness in describing why something is risky, then you can actually take a mitigation that is very, very tailored. You might choose to mitigate the threat or mitigate a vulnerability, meaning patch your system, or you could even choose instead to mitigate the consequence, meaning if there's some bad thing that's likely to happen if a threat is realized and a vulnerability is open, you can close the consequence and the overall risk will go down. So I think we need to be a little bit more precise in describing why something is risky and then be able to share that precise definition with each other. Earlier, Phyllis' introduction stressed the importance of information sharing in real time. You know, if we share these insights on risks within the U.S. or with foreign partners and it's not actionable, well, it's not real helpful. So real-time sharing, or as close to real-time sharing, needs to be an important part of that strategy. That real-time sharing, it needs to be done at speed, at scale, and with the appropriate privacy protections built in. Again, you can't do, it's our view that you can't do things at speed and scale without baking in privacy protections into that process. And I know that my interagency colleagues from Department of Homeland Security and FBI and the interagency as well, whole interagency as well, believe in that it's not a trade-off between security and privacy. It's about achieving both at the same time. So we talked about simply information sharing. I'd like to just touch briefly on, before I turn over the microphone to my next colleague, talk about what's after information sharing. So right now we're talking about sharing insights on vulnerabilities, threats, and consequences. But probably after that, we ought to be talking about sharing mitigation techniques. Meaning, so if I find something that's effective on my network in mitigating a risk, let's share those techniques with others as well, so each of us don't have to self-discover the best way to mitigate a risk. And then if you were to ask me, what is the operational strategy and problems we might solve with real-time information sharing at speed and scale, I'd offer two things. Number one, I would simply label as real-time integrated defenses. We're a big advocate of, you might remember the somewhat aging term, the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. It's a model that works very, very well for cybersecurity. And we think that it ought to be the model that we have in mind in which the shared information will feed. Again, observe, orient, decide, and act. And the second sort of futuristic area that I believe information sharing can enable is the idea of resiliency. Specifically, we believe that automated resiliency and automated regeneration are sort of the next problem to take on. So it's inevitable. In fact, one of my favorite provocative questions is, what would you do differently if you knew your network was going to be compromised? What you would do, I think, is you'd be taking some proactive measures to make sure you could regenerate to a known secure state so you can get back on your feet and start operating again. Right now, in our experience, that takes far too long. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months that people are shutting down their networks in order to recover from a compromised condition. So information sharing can ultimately fuel integrated real-time defenses, but ultimately down the road, information sharing can also help fuel automated resiliency regeneration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Rika Simerkini, Chief Advisor, Foreign and Security Policy, Office of the Prime Minister of Hungary in Budapest.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I very much appreciate, and I very much appreciate the sequence of the panel as well, because I think it really gives, as we discovered just a few minutes before the panel, that we share some of the fundamental beliefs of how our governments can handle the challenges arising from cybersecurity risks and developments. And I think what might be of interest for you also to have an added point in this panel is to have an understanding of how, based on the previously heard principles and values and policy directions that we're trying to follow and that we very much share, that I very much share also with the previous speakers, how this could be established in the case of a smaller country and on the regional level. Because what is really happening in Central Europe, I think, is a very interesting development. There is a breakthrough in this question. What I think have been the guiding principles in our governmental policies as well is really the two fundamental pillars that we believe: the shared responsibility, the cooperation, and the inclusion of these relevant stakeholders in a structure, and the time factor, which is really of essence, as we also heard just a few minutes before. So much so that our whole national cybersecurity strategy is based on this belief and of this conviction. So I felt really tempted to give as a subtitle to my presentation here a national and a regional case study of the cooperative model in cybersecurity. That's what we're trying to establish. And now, in retrospect, that we have set up an intergovernmental structure that I'm going to outline in a few sentences for you, and we have launched a regional cooperation, it seems logical. But just a few years back, it was not at all like that. And I think it's worth keeping that in mind, because this is something that we all face as decision makers as a difficulty. In the case of Hungary, for instance, there were 3 ministries that had responsibility in cybersecurity, and the decision to develop a cybersecurity legislation was made back in 2010. Until 2012, nothing happened. Why? I think the situation was a little bit like this old fairy tale of a king who has a sort of an army, who has generals or sort of generals, who has a military or weapons arsenal, but who has no idea how differently they would function if they were put together and if they were acting together. And that was exactly what we were having. We in Hungary also, we had a very good number of good capacities. The Hungarian National Security Agency was, for instance, regularly invited to contribute to designing the scenarios at NATO's cybersecurity exercises over the years. We also have a good number of talents related to various agencies behind the various ministries. But it never went through into a cooperative and efficient system until 2012, practically, when we decided to pull these resources together. When I called this first meeting together, I realized that the experts who were sitting there from the relevant ministries and the relevant agencies, who were corresponding with each other and criticizing each other's documents, obviously, most of them have never met before. They didn't know each other, and we're not that large a country, so that this should happen by definition. And I realized that the logic of cooperation is really something that has to be the basis of this work. So what we tried to convince them was that they can go on for another 2 weeks with the discourse, but if not, then we are going to draft the text for them. It made a very powerful impact on sorting out the differences. And so by 2013, May, we had a national cybersecurity strategy that was approved, and in June, we had the first act that was passed that could settle the responsibilities and the structures. What is the structure that we set up through these two basic legal documents? It is based on 3 levels of cooperation. On the top level, we set up as a National Cybersecurity Coordination Council, which includes, from the governmental side, all the policymakers from the relevant ministries and agencies on the top level, the decision-making level, that have responsibility in cybersecurity, as well as the representatives of the industry who have a special responsibility, the main IT providers, for instance, in the country. We call this other big unit of cooperation between the government and the industry the National Cybersecurity Forum. And it does allow a regular and high-level structure of all the industry decision makers to channel in their recommendations into governmental decisions, to understand the sort of priorities of the various governmental agencies, and to have a very sort of mutually beneficial interaction of ideas, thoughts, priorities, concerns, solutions, and a work that is coming out of this on a top level. One level under this, we set up working groups, and the working groups that we launched were really focused on the sectoral issues. So we set up a working group of, for instance, Homeland Security, a working group on e-public administration, on energy security, child protection, e-health, certs. And all of these working groups, we involve the senior level or governmental agencies and decision makers, together with the NGOs and the industry representatives who are involved and interested in these in that particular sector. So what is really very beneficial from this working group level is that all the industry decision makers, the companies and as well as the NGOs, even academia who work in a particular field, can immediately develop proposals for parliamentary decisions, for instance. So there is a very quick sort of mid-level interaction of expertise and of decision makers. It has become such a good sort of structure that I remember last year when the European Union had a high-level conference on revising the European Union cybersecurity strategy and how it was functioning. When we presented the Hungarian solution, the EU commented of this saying, Hungary offers best practice in cybersecurity. And that was really what was supported by the commissioner and by the top-level industry representatives at this conference, so that the other governments also take into consideration and adopt, if possible. Besides the also, I think in the sectoral levels, we have made quite a good development and improvement in cybersecurity cooperation based on this logic. We had just most recently, a month and a half ago or so, an International Atomic Energy Agency conference where this working group on atomic energy was presented to the representatives, and there again we got the comment that this is really a best practice in atomic energy cybersecurity cooperation. Based on these very positive results, we approached our regional partners. We have a very good and long tradition of working together in Central Europe between the Visegrad countries, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. And we have established several layers of this working together. For instance, there is one that is the chief security advisors to the prime ministers in the 4 countries. We meet, 3-4 times a year. But we also channeled in this suggestion to include the cooperation, include cybersecurity into the cooperation of these working on a regional level. And as a result of this suggestion, we had last summer the first regional cybersecurity exercise, which was initiated by Hungary and that was carried out on the work of the National Security Agency, and that was seen as a very successful and very effective way to understand each other's priorities and to understand how quickly risks in one country can influence the others and how we can respond more efficiently if we cooperate. I think these regional suggestions are of real benefit to all of us. And as I recall, when we presented these at NATO headquarters last summer, we got the question was, should we proceed with this regional cooperation in cybersecurity, or is there any value in addition to what we see it? The confirmation was really strong and straightforward. So it was really seen as a very positive contribution to Alliance cybersecurity efforts. With this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So as was mentioned, cybersecurity is a multifaceted, multi-layered problem, if not beast. And as we look at this, both within each country and extending, I would suggest that if on the technical side, very often our CERTs, our computer emergency response teams that have been mentioned, or readiness teams as we call it here, for example, ours within DHS communicates with hundreds of other CERTs nationwide. And the technical people, as culture has developed, have no issues talking to other technical people. So information gets out person to person, or sometimes as I call it, PDF to person. This is slower than machine to machine, which is where we're going, and that's what's coming out of our NCIC and DHS. But to do this right, it takes microcosm, so how we communicate among our interagency partners and private sector in one region and country, and then how all the other countries do that together. So I would put it to our panelists today. Let's talk about both what incentivizes the private sector to work with each other and with government to share this info, or to fill the blood with immune or antibodies, as you will, to use Phil's analogy, and then also how do the agencies work together. And I will add a plug for the cooperation that we do get from the NSA and the FBI and the Secret Service and ICE and all the other letters you might imagine has never been better here. So, start.
Yeah, let me talk about the 2 pieces, but sort of the government cooperation and then the private sector, and at some point in time they both have to come together. I'll do the easier part first, which is the government piece. One of the things we've done is create a committee structure. With the top of the committee structure is our deputy ministers within the government, so the most senior official within the government departments. And we have a committee that brings together every government department that in any way touches on cybersecurity. So it's the obvious, some of the technical and intelligence groups on the one end, but it also involves the foreign ministry, but it also gets into the economic side. So our industry department is in there, our finance department, because we all have parts of that, the cybersecurity program to bring together. That seems to work very well. It provides that strategic, longer-term vision, and of course we then have a committee structure underneath that to try to bring the government departments together. It helps a little bit with public safety, doing that cross-government coordination piece to make sure that as topics come up, we make sure that every government department that in any way touches on this issue come together, because cyber is one of those things that can hit any government department. And actually one of the challenges that the private sector threw out to us when we were putting our strategy together, they said, look, we've got to decide, you've got to tell us who do we come into government to talk to on cybersecurity, because it could be anybody. So we said, look, don't worry about it. Everybody agreed that it would be public safety, would be the doorway in, and then we would facilitate that coordination across for the private sector. For the private sector, the interesting thing, there's 2 parts to it. One is we've heard from chief executive officers that cybersecurity should not be a competitive issue between companies. How they deliver services, they will compete, and that's their bread and butter. But if one part of a bank, for example, is being attacked, it's to the betterment of all of the banks that they work together to stop that, because you don't want to destroy the integrity of the systems. So we're not seeing that competition on the cybersecurity piece between the various companies. It's actually quite encouraging that they can actually sit, you see chief executive officers sitting around a table saying, what's in the national interest when I look at this? They're not looking at it for their particular corporation. So I think that works really well. And then we've created a committee of chief executive officers to provide advice into the government. So we start to bring those two pieces together. It's nothing like having the private sector come along and say, government, here's what you've got to be doing better to try to help us along. And it works very, very well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's cooperations among the government agencies and the private sectors are important. But there are several challenges. For example, the CERT, Japan has a JP CERT. It's a publicly funded non-profit organization. It's not really government, so there's some limit of sharing information between the government agencies, particularly intelligence agencies with those CERTs. But we have to work on how to standardize the intelligence classifications, intelligence qualifications. And also, in Japan's case, the public ICT effort is led by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industries and Economic Ministry of Communications. So they have those functions and public organizations. And so I think it's a good part of this is we can exploit the business initiatives and the developments in these cyber security areas. So the next step is how to cooperate with those business sectors, with the government security agencies. So we need to develop, and also we want to have discussion with foreign partners, how we can cooperate in those public and private cooperations. And for example, we need, as I mentioned in my presentation, the Ministry of Defense is established a Cyber Defense Conference, CDC, to promote cooperations. And it's important to give incentives to private sectors. So we need to share best practices without harming the reputation of the companies who cooperated. Thank you.
I'll go next. And I'm trying to say something provocative just to see if you're still awake. Did you know that NSA is inside a bunch of your cell phones? Okay, now what I really mean, it's not at all what you think, so I promise you that. What I really mean is that one of NSA, I told you earlier, NSA's strategy, one of NSA's missions is to help secure the Department of Defense computer systems in partnership with lots of others, so that's one of our missions. In doing so, it doesn't make sense for the NSA to try and develop specialized technologies that just the government or just the Department of Defense would use. So what we try to do is we try and influence the security of commercial products for the better and raise up the security of those products so they're good enough for the Department of Defense and the national security systems to use. So one example is that, getting back to my cell phone loose end, I need to close with you. Several years ago, NSA helped develop secure Linux, an operating system that's at the root of many cell phones in the room here. And we helped publish that open standard for a secure operating system for Linux. And now it's being adopted by the private sector in large parts. And the government's going to benefit from that. So our strategy is influence the security of commercial off-the-shelf products for the positive, because that's a tide that floats all boats. It makes the commercial products good enough for the Department of Defense to use, and of course it raises the security of those products and the whole nation benefits. Information sharing is the exact same strategy, where if the NSA or the US government can share information with the private sector and our foreign partners, that's a tide that floats all boats as well. It'll make others' cybersecurity better, and quite honestly, the US government is going to get information back from those private sector and foreign partners. And of course, the private sector is where the innovation in the building and the operating of these systems actually happens. So that the two-way exchange of information sharing is an absolutely essential strategy, and it gets back to the tide floats all boats. And one last thing, in case there's any question all about my cell phone joke, just talk to me afterwards. It was just a joke.
Thanks for making that clear. And one piece just to amplify what Phil said, the commercial products are very important. So as a government, we're looking very closely at how do we increase the amount of innovation. I can speak for us at DHS. How do we increase the amount of innovation we can not only glean from DoD and NSA and other parts of government, what they're building and using. We have some joint research projects as well, as you know, but also getting out to the West Coast. As you heard, our Secretary announced a West Coast office for DHS last week at RSA, as well as the Secretary of Defense announced that as well. As a government, we're looking at how we can work, get some mind share, understand how the rest of the country thinks, get out of Washington sometimes, but also bring good science into what we are trying to build to then work with the rest of our international partners as well. So with that, I'm sorry. Dr. Smith.
Yeah, I just think it's really one of those most important issues that can make or break a system. And I think in our experience, exactly as Robert said, the point of entry for the concerns, issues, suggestions is very important to identify, and that is really what is being offered through the working groups, and that has established a very solid cooperation in the various sectors between the stakeholders and between the decision makers. What we could see is that hotlines were established, for instance, by the partners in working in the working groups in both the energy sector and in the other sectors as well, through which you could identify immediately the relevant people to give responsibility, to coordinate very fast, and so the level of cooperation was raised so drastically, practically through after the setup of these working groups and the launch of the cooperation inside between industry, NGOs and government, that really created a very positive effect.
So when we look back and we talk about information sharing, and the question I first introduced, where's it going? Why are we doing this? And Phil mentioned the blood. I look at it as well as an immune system. The faster we get actionable information to a machine, the more likely it is that that machine will then refuse to execute an instruction that is malicious. But the question is, how do we gather enough together so that we can push out an understanding of what's good and bad, and not only speed, but scale was mentioned. So I might pose to the panelists, if it's fair, how would each country look at not only working within your countries and your certs and your policies that are forming in each different way to collect this right information and get it out, how do we then start looking as a world to collect the right information in the right places?
I guess there's a couple of parts to that. And let me talk about the piece, and it's come up a couple of times, and sort of how do we start sharing information at machine speed rather than how fast I can write it or type an email with all the inherent errors that come along with that. One of the, as I mentioned in my comments, one of the interesting things is the agreement to use the sticks and taxi protocol as a way to both one part of the software starts to describe the data, and the second part of the software is how you actually start to transport the data quickly. And we've had agreement now between Canada and the United States, so ideally at some point in time, and we have some policy issues that we need to work out both within our respective countries, because the security is one part of it, but it's also the privacy piece needs to be factored in as a critical element of that. And we can sort those out. We're working with our privacy folks now. But ideally what will happen is you'll see an alert come up in a financial institution, as an example, which will immediately go amongst the banks. It will go into the CERT community, go across the border to another CERT community, and out to the respective private sector at the speed of the internet, not at the speed how we would normally move data, so we can actually start to action it. And I think that's really exciting. We've started to see some other countries take up the same initiative. We've had discussions with Australia, who are, as an example, are along the way of adopting it as well, and as other countries are moving along. So I think there's a bit of a momentum to start to do that. There's flexibility on what software protocols it can be, but basically we've got to agree to it. The second thing is, how do we then entice industry to come in? What is industry going to get out of this? Well, there's two things. One, the more information they put into it, the better the CERT community is at actually analyzing that and giving it back to the private sector, information that's coming from a range of companies. That's on the voluntary side. But Canada last week announced as part of our budget that we will be introducing legislation fairly soon that will compel what we're going to be describing as vital cyber system operators, that they will be required to advise us of incidents that occur on their systems. We'll be working with the private sector to define what those actually will be and reporting mechanisms. But it's to get that information into the government, put it in a way that anonymizes it and getting it back out to the private sector so they can see benefit from it and actually take some action to stop the attacks from coming in rather than dealing with it after the effect.
Super, and we too favor unified cyber breach reporting, so perhaps our nearest neighbors can advise on that.
So how to share information, that's a challenge. And as I mentioned, in Japan's case, we established a new cybersecurity headquarters this January. So they have a authority or power to collect information from relevant ministries. So as a Ministry of Defense point, we are obliged to submit some materials and threat information if we get materials. But we also expect the well-processed and analyzed information for each relevant ministries. And for the foreign partners, I think in some cases we need some framework or agreement, such as GSOMIAs, to exchange information in a timely and secure manner. Yeah, I already mentioned about the private sectors. Giving incentives to the private sector is important, and also have some agreement between the government sectors and private sector may be necessary.
You expect information to come in analyzed, which is very helpful. How do you balance the integrity of the analysis from whom it comes to you?
Integrity of?
How do you know it's right, or how would you weigh one organization's opinion of a set of indicators versus another, should they differ?
I think each ministry has to have their own capacities to analyze, and then, but the perspectives may be different, so we need to explain how we assess this one from what point, from which point of views, and so it's important to have. We need to have a daily, like a daily and regular basis discussions among the agencies to know each other's.
I'm having you answer all of our challenges for me this morning, so Phil.
So I have a question for the crowd, and I promise you I won't embarrass you with your answer, but I would like you to raise your hand. My question is going to be, does policy drive technology, or does technology drive policy? So raise your hand. Does policy drive technology? You raise your hand. Yeah, no trick answers, I promise. Or is it the opposite? Right. I'd say that it's both, right? You can't have leaps of technology without policy keeping pace. Similarly, you can't develop policy in a vacuum without the top technology folks, helping to shape that policy. A former colleague from Department of Homeland Security used to say, it's the soft stuff that's the hard stuff, right? So the technology stuff tends to continue to deliver at a pretty good pace. The harder stuff is the policy-oriented thing. So my ask among all of us is that we keep an eye on doing both policy development and technology development, but recognize that the soft stuff is the hard stuff, and so you need to build in a little bit more time to work some of the things that require people to make decisions jointly, such as, and, key enablers of that. Again, it's another project that DHS and FBI and NSA are working on. It's called the Enhanced Situational Awareness effort. And it's trying to develop the architecture to now allow sharing of cybersecurity information at machine speed and scale. But some of the softer things, those things that have taken the longest time, are creating what we're calling multilateral information sharing agreements. And earlier you mentioned very importantly the things such as STIX and TAXI, standards for sharing information. And so we just need to build in time very deliberately into our schedules to address both the hard stuff and the soft stuff.
This question really goes back to the beginnings of all these dilemmas. I think Budapest was the first the place where the first international document was signed, the Budapest Convention back in 2001, maybe, and the last ever since. And these dilemmas really are there, but I also very much believe that policy decisions and policy priorities have a very powerful impact on promoting cooperation and bringing through values that are of importance.
Let me start back with you at this end. What are some of the challenges that you face today with some of the, or that you see with the international piece of this and expanding the sharing to all the countries to really get it right?
There's a vast number of challenges. Yeah, it's, I think obviously how technology can respond to the developments and how that can be incorporated into decision making is a fundamental challenge to all of us. But I think in terms of the existing cooperations or existing frameworks, whether we can fill them in with concrete cooperation is the next big step, and how we can remain consistent on bringing forward a model of cooperation and a model of integration across the borders in the international level. That's a fundamentally big challenge, and how countries of the same value basis can develop that cross-border cooperation is the next big step, which is, I think, ahead of us for the next months to come, or at least years.
Thank you. Bill, any thoughts?
I think I'm going to defer to my colleagues on this and hear them out if they don't mind. I just say, just very briefly, that back with my previous point, that we need to focus on what are the norms of behavior in cyberspace that we can all agree to, and then maybe sketch some multilateral information sharing agreements among like-minded countries, and then you build out from there. But I don't think we can do that, 250 countries at a time. You have to start small and build out. But I'd really like to hear some of the other answers.
As for challenges in corporations, I think it's important to have trust and confidence in each other, but because we need to share information which are sensitive, and we need to share technologies to share is sensitive too. So we need to develop those trusts through confidence building measures sometimes, and also some joint practice and training. And on the other side, on the other hand, so international cybersecurity has important aspects. Even some of the countries which are not really friendly to Japan have a common interest in discussing the cybersecurity. Although we have limitations in sharing information, but it's important to develop the policy discussions.
Just three very, very quick points. One is the growth in cybercrime. And I would just want to put a plug in for my colleague. The Budapest Convention, I think, is an extremely important document. We're encouraging countries to sign up to it. Canada has signed. We've now recently passed all the enabling legislation, so we hope to be ratifying that soon, and we've been encouraging other countries to do it. The second thing is cybersecurity now is coming up on literally every international agenda. And one of the big challenges is how do we actually keep all of that coordinated? There's just there's no forum, no place, no discussion where cybersecurity is not a part of it. And the third thing is we need to be looking at how do we do some international exercises. We're pretty good at being able to, within the CERT community, being able to respond at the technical level to the incident. But I think the thing we've got to be starting to think about is how do we start to respond at the policy level when an incident occurs that goes across sectors? Because as we've said many times, cyber basically touches everything. We're all linked into one. So how do we actually sit down and look at some of those policy issues, and policy issues at the speed of the internet and not the way we typically have done some of those things in the past?
That's a great a great way to sum up a lot of the conversation. We're open to questions and answer questions if there are any from the audience. The mics.
Hi, Medika Keo. I basically straddle operational, technical, and policy around information sharing. And I wanted to make a comment, and I had a question. So there's a group called FIRST, which is a collection of incident response teams, both from the government side as well as the public sector. And there's actually an initiative that's starting a special interest group on dealing with what to share, with whom to share, and what you're allowed to do with the data after you've received it from somebody. So I would encourage everybody on the panel from the government side to work with your national certs that do represent it first, because that has not been clear at all. And I've been in operational security groups that have shared information since 2000. I was actually in Estonia in 2007. I am Estonian. I was actually the trusted introducer. And I was just reflecting back that that incident was 8 years ago, right? So actually discussing how we deal with any kind of cross-boundary issues, I'm hoping that at least, and this is where I get to the question, how from the government or intergovernment have you decided on what to share with whom between interagencies and what they're allowed to do with the data?
Dealing with the two parts of the question. One is on FIRST. Canada is a participant in FIRST. We have been for quite a while. It's a very useful forum to be exchanging information. As far as what information can be shared, we work that out with the private sector. We have memorandums of understanding with each one of the organizations that we meet with to participate in sharing information from the government. So those organizations are very comfortable with the information that they're providing. So they've got to decide what to share. And the second part of it then, what is the government going to do with it? So it's an agreement that we reach in advance, and it will describe what the government will subsequently do with that information, the privacy that's afforded to that. And that way the owners of the information, the private sector, can actually go back to whoever their stakeholders are and say, here's what they're doing with the government, and we're doing this willingly, and here's what the protections are for your information. It's the same kind of thing we're doing internationally when we're sharing information. So it starts within a national context, but then broadens out when we start to look at it internationally.
In Japan's case, between the government agencies, we have, as I mentioned, a new Basic Act on Cybersecurity has enabled the cabinet to collect some information and materials from relevant ministries. But with the private sectors, we don't have authority to collect information. So it depends on the volunteer basis. So it's important to give them incentives.
My experience is that information sharing and cybersecurity is mostly done today on a bilateral basis, and perhaps more and more on a multi-party basis. But I don't think there's a model yet that describes in one or two sentences the decision-making process for sharing across countries at large.
Yeah, I tend to agree absolutely that it works really well when it's on a very strictly bilateral basis, whether it's private industry and government or agency, or whether it's between two countries. The concepts and the principle and then the practices of how to sort of get down to that bilateral meeting, that's where collaboration and the more regional framework can help.
I would add that we have a new acronym in town called the ISAO, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, which broadens, it's the ISAC concept, where like, and normally those who know each other already, but like groups get together. But this expands it from critical infrastructure into groups of dentists or groups of planets. But anyone that wants to form said group, and DHS has the responsibility of identifying a standards organization to help us say what would make an official, quote, ISAO or not. And why that's important is that the administration has suggested, and we're working with Congress on this, targeted liability protection, incentivizing, saying you're not going to get sued for criminal liability, I'm not a lawyer, but for sharing information with these groups. And as we work with our interagency, private sector, and international partners, one of the big pieces of progress has been getting to this sort of raw material, as I call it, but the cyber threat indicator. So working with our experts in civil liberties and privacy, finding the things that can warn machines of what not to execute, while also not carrying any private information or intellectual property, and trying to understand what an indicator means to the different groups. So of all the challenges represented, these are the things that have to get worked out. But when you go at machine speed, there's not a lot of time for a machine to make a big decision. That ruins the speed versus scale. So we have to put all of that policy out front, and that's why it's taking the world a long time to get this one right. But we're focused on, just like your weather map, and I use that analogy a lot as to what we're building in situational awareness, but you have things like temperature and humidity, or what color is the sky versus the actual storm. So we're looking for the right balance, I think, across the world is a fair assessment. Other questions? I don't know how much more time we... So we have 2 minutes, a fast question and a run through the panel.
Sure. An aspect of information sharing that from the private sector I would love to get is attribution, because almost all attacks are false flag in some sense. Now, I don't know if that is inherently the kind of thing that causes you to have qualms about revealing sources and methods, but attribution is something that we're almost as interested in as you are.
Yeah, the very fast answer is we're doing some of the attribution we do in private classified briefings that we give to the private sector, where we provide them with security clearances. Some of those we actually do with the Department of Homeland Security and in some of the critical infrastructure sectors. But quite often we find from the private sector, certainly at the technical level, they don't care. That's what we're being told, and they're actually happy that we strip off it all the information or all the things that would make the information otherwise classified, so they can get out the indications of warning. They can actually do something about it.
I think attribution is important, but it's sometimes difficult. But because of technologies to attribute is becoming more and more realistic, and we can have attribution cooperation with countries such as our allies. And also, domestically, we also have some legal limit and constitutional restrictions to how much we can attribute, how we can respond. So we need to have technological challenges and the legal challenges to implement attribution. But if we can successfully attribute, and if we can demonstrate that we can attribute, attribution capability would create deterrence against potential adversaries using cyberspace.
I'd say that attribution is very important in some situations, but it's overrated in others. And specifically, attribution is rarely timely enough or certain enough to allow a machine speed action to mitigate a very important problem. So while we need to keep our eye on attribution for the times where it's important, other times action speaks louder than words, and it's important to mitigate a risk rather than determining with 99.9% certainty who actually did this to.
I would perfectly agree, and I would just underline, I think there is an order of priority as well, that definitely it's mitigation that comes first, and then if there is a point to really have a clear an attribution cleared, then it's second, but definitely it's a little over-exaggerated on some occasions.
I want to thank our panelists. If you can join me in a round of applause for these great thinkers from around the world.